The following is a talk taken from the Spirit Release Forum Conference held in London in June 2013 with the theme of Spirit Release, Helping Lost Souls Move into the Light. This talk by Dr. Terence is entitled The Science of Spirit Possession.
By original training, but has been deeply interested in spirit release activities. He was part of the Spirit Release Foundation and then has been connected with the forum. And he went on to actually do his doctorate in spirit release subjects. So, without more ado, Terence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much to David for inviting me along, and I thank all of you for attending to listen to what I have to say. First of all, I'd like to tell you that it was never my intention to be a therapist of any kind, or an academic, or a scientist. As a youngster at school, I just wanted a life of adventure. So the first opportunity I got to leave school, I joined the army. I wanted to see the world, have adventures, meet interesting people, and learn how to kill them. Came out of the army as a very, very young man at the age of 22, went into the transport industry, on the ground floor, on the bottom rung as a truck driver, moved through on a career progression to the top where I became a transport consultant and an organiser of conferences and exhibitions on the application of computers to the distribution industry. This was in the 80s. And then the year 2000 came along, at the end of the Thatcher era of growth and expansion, economic collapse, and everything I'd worked for my entire adult life had gone. Nothing. Like a house of cards, everything just collapsed. Home, business, family, nothing. And I found myself at the age of 45 in the Cretan mountains as a hermit, saying, what am I doing here? And it was then that my education began. And it began, and I'd like to take you through this story using two books that mark the bookends, if you like, of this journey. And the first book is the Bible. I was never a religious person, never brought up to be religious, had no religious beliefs at all. But this book marked the beginning of my journey when I was on the Cretan mountain. The second book is the thesis, and that's the topic of my talk today, my doctoral thesis. And I'm just using a PowerPoint presentation just to remind me where I am. I'm not going to give a lecture. I'm just going to introduce to you the value to me of scientific research. And before I begin, I just want to put into context what I mean by spirit possession. As spirit release practitioners and people with an interest in the spiritual world, we tend to use terms attachment and release. William Baldwin coined the term releasement, which we don't really use very much, but attachment and release is something we're all familiar with. The Spiritists talk about spirit obsession rather than possession. There are the earthbound souls that we've heard about from Archie and Talia. Positive invited possession is where spiritualist mediums become possessed in trance and want to communicate with the spirit world. You have the ritual invited possession, in traditional religions, Wicca, animism, shamanism. This is the area of possession that is of particular interest to the anthropologists, and I'm very pleased to say that we have a senior academic anthropologist with us today. The negative, uninvited possession, Roman Catholicism, all the great religions around the world have their demons, their jinn, and so on. And of course, spirit possession has, in the mind of the general public perception, everyone knows what we're talking about. We're talking about spirit possession, the possession of a human being by a spirit entity. So when we, as spirit release practitioners, talk about attachment and release, the general public don't really know what we're talking about. And if you try to use the word attachment in academia or clinical circles, it has a completely different meaning altogether. It's the emotional attachment between people, mother and child and so on. I've used the term possession because of the academic demands of my doctorate. Academia knows what you're talking about when you're talking about possession. And I didn't want to try and introduce to my academic supervisors, I didn't want to educate them about release. So I towed the line of what was required of me in order to get the doctorate by using the word possession. We wouldn't know what we're talking about. And I like William Baldwin's turn of phrase where he talked about the influence of discarnate consciousnesses of any kind on the living. So it embraces a very, very broad spectrum of different types of consciousness. So whilst doing an academic thesis on possession, I had to approach these questions. Where is the evidence that there is such a thing? If it's not, as psychiatry generally believes, all things spiritual are in the misguided beliefs and false perceptions, in the imaginings of the mind. So where is the scientific evidence that there is such a thing as a discarnate consciousness? Eyewitness testimony of possession and exorcism is just not believed by the general public. It's a subject that's used for horror films. People who are spiritualists, for them it's not a belief, it's a way of life. It's a knowing, it's a knowledge they have. But where is the scientific evidence for that? The spiritists of Brazil, spiritist healing practices. Again, is that a belief? Is it a doctrine that was introduced by Allan Kardec? Or does it have scientific validity? DMILS, distant mental influence on living systems. Can a mind influence the behaviour of a living cell over distance? Out-of-body experiences, near-death experience, and break-off syndrome. Anyone ever heard of break-off syndrome? I hadn't either. And I didn't discover it from my academic researches, but I discovered it from talking to a fighter pilot, because the university where I did this research was at Bangor, North Wales. And I met a fighter pilot who was stationed at Valley, where Prince William is. And we just got talking, and he asked me what I was researching, so I told him, and he said, oh, that sounds like break-off syndrome. I said, break-off syndrome, what's that? He said, oh, it's great. He said, it's what we call an UBI. I said, an UBI? What's an UBI? He said, out-of-body experience. And he went on to explain, this is a common occurrence with airline pilots and fighter pilots, where they're an automatic pilot, the plane is in level supersonic flight, there's nothing for them to do, and suddenly they find themselves outside the aircraft, on the wing, looking in. It freaks them out until they become educated about it, and then they can accept it, and they go into the NAFI, to the officer's mess at the end of the flight, and they go and say, hey, guess what, I just had another Ubi. Out-of-body experience. Electronic voice communication, there's a lot of emerging evidence about spirit talking to people through electronic media. And of course, SRT practitioners and their patients and clients. So these are all sources of evidence that there is such a thing as a discarnate consciousness. But is it open to rigorous hypothesis testing? This is the domain of scientific investigation. We can stand here and talk about our experiences. It's wonderful to listen to Archie and Natalia talking about their experiences, but the skeptic, the scientist, will say, well, where is the evidence? Can it be tested? Archie's given us examples of his statistical evidence on his case studies, demographic data, so to speak. But my interest is rigorous hypothesis testing. So when it comes to the scientific evaluation of the spirit realms, we come up with this. From time to time, it's been the fashion to laugh at miracles and to deny that they occur. And this is absurd. We know it's absurd. Pierre Janet was a 19th century French psychiatrist who was the originator of what has now become known as dissociation theory. People who switch personality, multiple personality disorder, and so on. This was, since Janet, has become considered to be a psychological abnormality. And interestingly enough, Pierre Janet was in fact a mystic and a psychologist. And even in his own autobiography, he declares that he made a decision to veer away from his mystical abilities, his psychic abilities, because he wanted to become an established scientist. He made the choice. He didn't seem to understand at the time you can do both. Now, my belief is that the time is rapidly approaching when the scientific facts presented in the science of spirit possession, which is the name I've given to my thesis, will be used as a foundation for teaching all medical students. And the feedback I've got from around the world reinforces that. I've had some very positive feedback from India, from Brazil, from the United States, from Scandinavian countries. So I'm actually in the process now of negotiating with an academic publishing house to get the thesis published under that title. So I wanted to introduce the thesis to you, but we come to motivation here. Now, institutions are motivated to carry out research for these reasons. Self-evident, really. Going back to what Pierre Janet said, all scientific research begins with a miracle, something we don't understand. We need to understand it. We need to understand and explain the natural world. Going back to when I introduced myself with no intention of being a scientist or an academic, I just wanted to experience the world. And there I am, on a creek mount at the age of 45 with nothing, saying, where do I go from here? So where does my motivation for research come from? It comes from here. When one day, a friend of mine said to me, there's a Greek man who is very, very upset because he's not been able to make love with his wife for the past 8 years. And she's a beautiful woman, he loves her dearly. And he would like to find out how she can be helped. You can't make love to her because she has a bad back. Whenever he tries to make love to her, she complains about her back. It's not an excuse, this is genuine. So my friend said to me, I think you can help him. Because what I'd been demonstrating up to that point was people who had insect bites and headaches, and just touched them and the pain went away. I didn't know how it was done. So when I helped this woman who'd had a back pain for 8 years, she couldn't speak English, I couldn't speak Greek, I just stood behind her, used what I didn't even know what it was then. Now I do. I had no knowledge at all. And she got up, she opened her eye, she smiled at me, and she bent over and touched her toes for the first time in 8 years. And he said to me, what kind of magic is this? Well, I didn't know. I had no idea. And that was the beginning of my questioning. People would say to me, how did you do that? I don't know. A whole series of questions. How does that work? Where did that come from? Inspiration. Someone asks a question, you give the answer. Where did that come from? No idea. I'm not psychic, I'm not a medium, I'm not clairvoyant. Where did that information come from? So, again, where's the evidence for that? Now they're asking me, and I don't have the answers. Now I'm asking the questions. Who's going to answer my questions? Who do I ask? I didn't even know where to begin. It was just confusion. And then I had my very first experience, and what I have since learned is a compulsion. I didn't hear a voice, it was just an idea. It was a name going around in my head for no apparent reason. The name James just kept coming into my mind. And I had no idea why. My middle name was James, my father's name was James, but it didn't mean anything at that time and that place. I went to my campsite and I rummaged around in my rucksack and I dug out this book, which was a gift to me by a very dear friend. And I know that when she gave it to me, she was a bit disappointed because she could see that I placed no value on it. I wasn't a religious person, I didn't read the Bible. And to me it was just a friendly gift, you know. But I had this compulsion now. I went to my bag at the campsite, rummaged through it, picked up the book, and it fell open. It could fall open now, anywhere, but it fell open on a particular page. Now I have to keep a bookmark there. Fell open at the book of James. And this stopped me in my tracks. Because it said, got a question, ask God, you get the answer. From great. Fantastic. And I didn't realise at that time, I knew that it was profound, I knew it was significant, but I had no idea how significant it was going to be. What I've learned since then is that any time I need information about anything, all I have to do is ask. And it's those questions that have led me here today talking to you about the science of spirit possession. For me, there is no difference between religious belief and scientific investigation. To me, it's one and the same thing, because when you discover something that is true and it becomes a belief, it cannot just be dismissed as an erroneous belief. It has validity, and it can be scientifically validated. So I asked this question. People were asking me, what kind of magic is this? How do you do that? I didn't know. I needed to find out. So where do I start looking? Well, I didn't realise this at the time, but this was the domain that I was going to step into. If I'd known, I wouldn't have stepped into it, because it's huge. Look at it. I've discovered this since. I had no idea what transpersonal psychology was. Past life and ancestral residue, didn't know. So I had to go away and get educated. Came back to England, took my degree in psychology, learned nothing. I learned about scientific method, but they weren't interested in the spirit. I actually went to Christ Church, University College in Canterbury, a university that's owned by the Church of England, Canterbury Cathedral. They weren't interested in the spirit. But I learned scientific method. I learned to test hypotheses. And that's when I started to put my newfound knowledge into practice. I began working with a doctor, and he would send me patients, his most difficult patients, suffering from chronic conditions, like epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, Tourette's syndrome, stuff like that. And I was treating them. Great. Terrific. But nobody would believe it. So how do you do that? Again, coming back to these questions, how do you do that? I introduced the word epistemology here just to demonstrate how science and academia can take something simple and make it unintelligible. Can anybody tell me what the word epistemology, I'm not going to ask you, Fiona, because I know you know. What does the word epistemology mean?
It's generally taken to be the study and understanding of what our knowledge systems are.
Okay. How do we know what we think we know? It's the philosophical study of knowledge. Okay, so how do we know what we think we know? The journey from mystery to explanation and understanding. So what I'm telling you, standing here telling you now, is an epistemological tale, if you like. My journey of discovery and understanding. But how do we learn? We learn from others, we go to school, we go to university, and we get taught things by others. We can use our own rational deduction and logic, work things out for ourselves. We can learn from our own personal experience, and this goes back to David's introduction. All of us that are speaking here today are speaking not from an academic or theoretical standpoint, but from our own experience. And throughout my thesis, I've reinforced the value of experience in scientific research. So for me, from alpha to omega, from question to answer, the book of James, for me, is the beginning. And the answer, provided by the 19th century psychic researcher and founder, co-founder of the Society for Psychical Research, Frederick Myers. And what I've discovered from my reading is that this word epistemology is actually the Greek for science. So we don't need to understand the philosophical study of epistemology, we just do science. But in order to qualify for the doctorate, I had to entitle my thesis Revised Epistemology. It's a revised science, in order to help us to understand spirit release therapy. And the amazing thing is that 125 years ago, the conception of the Society for Psychical Research, Frederick Myers set out to answer all these questions. And he found the answers for science. And what's even more interesting is that science still refuses to acknowledge his work. Myers said there's no such thing as supernatural or paranormal. That's what he said. Everything is natural. So Myers gave me a fantastic platform in order to investigate and try to answer these questions that were being asked of me in the Cretan Mountains. And since I've finished the thesis, I put a website together because I hope that it will lead to clinical research. So I bring this up on the screen for you now. This is the result of my doing the thesis. Under the main heading there, research, there are articles, case studies, and research proposals. I don't expect for a minute that institutionalized research is going to take any notice of this. This is for your benefit, okay? Because I know that institutionalized scientific research depends on funding, depends on a particular mindset, which isn't there at the moment. So I'm not going to hold my breath. But I put this on the screen for you to show that there are resources there for information. Right? How we can collect attention. Is it the intuitive therapist? Are you using hypnosis? Are you using a remote method? I've recorded 5 different types of method there, which again I'm not going to go to a debate about, but you can by all means have access to them, see whether you agree or not. It's a question of how we choose to describe things, really. On individual case studies, and I'm not going to call this up because, again, I'm conscious of the time, but I've posted onto this website an example video recording of a medium at work. We were contacted, David and I were contacted by a man in India who was having problems, and he was asking if we could help. And he granted me permission to record his case. I recorded an interview with Skype with him, and he described his symptoms and his problem. I went to my medium. I was working with at the time, close to where I live. There he is. And I just said to him, I want you to tell me what the problem is. I didn't tell him the person's name. I didn't even say whether it was male or female. I just said, I've got a person I'm holding in my mind who's contacted me with a problem. I want you to tell me what the problem is. And he tuned in straight away to a doctor, a medical doctor, working in an accident and emergency unit in a hospital in India. And he told me what the problem was. I then shared that with the client from India, and he was amazed. It hit the nail right in the head, solved his problem. What I wanted to show you, to demonstrate to you, is how easy it is to get this kind of information. Recording, Archie said he doesn't like to use electronic equipment. I find it invaluable in order to document cases for study. as examples of how techniques can work. Now, as a member of the Royal Society of Medicine, I go to lectures at the Royal Society, and I see psychiatrists and doctors present their lectures to the young student doctors, medical students, and they always use video recorded case studies to demonstrate their point. And I see absolutely no reason at all why we shouldn't do that as well, with obviously permission from the patient, from the client. So the individual case study, assessment interview, intervention, post-intervention interview, is there a difference? Same with epidemiology, demographic data, baseline symptoms, intervention method, outcome, is there a difference? It's simple. Science is simple. In the 17th century in Europe, there was a Jesuit priest Father Johann Joseph Gassner. Technology's failed me. Because the file's in a different place. In the 17th century, he was the greatest exorcist in all of Christendom. He was so powerful and so successful that the Pope told him to go away and be quiet and behave himself. And his cures are well documented. And I was able to put together in my thesis a table of the records that Father Gassner kept, a small selection of the records that he kept. The complaint that was presented to him, whether it was a male or female, and whether it was cured or not. Just a simple list. And some of the, sorry, I can't show it to you, some of the conditions that he cured just by prayer. Amazing. He wasn't doing scientific research, he was collecting data. He was collecting information. And naturally, tribunals were put together to investigate the activities of Father Gassner from the church and from the scientific establishment. They both destroyed him because they couldn't accept what he was doing.
I think they deleted his file.
It is. I do have it. Those of you who are interested can access the thesis and you'll find it there. Father Gassner, Gassner. Shakuntala Modi, an American psychiatrist that many of you have probably heard of, wrote remarkable healings. And she had the foresight to collect statistical data on her cases. And she found that out of 100 cases, 92% had an earthbound spirit. We heard Archie earlier talking about percentages and statistics. We need to use these methods of delivering information, because when you hear a statistical or a percentage, people pay attention to it. 80% had more than one. 50% had spirits of relatives. 77% had demonic spirit. You hear people, even in spirit release circles, say there's no such thing as a demon or a devil. Devil doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a power of evil. Well, we have to ask the question, is this hypothesis open to statistical hypothesis testing? It's no good saying I don't believe in it. You have to test it. Is it real? Is it imagined? 80% of acute and 30% of chronic symptoms were caused by spirits, according to Modi's research. 20% of acute and 70% of chronic symptoms were caused by past or life trauma. So this is the value of collecting routine, everyday data from your own clients. Without being a scientist, you just need to collect information. Now, what interests me is testing the efficacy of remote SRT. All the questions that were posed to me on a creek mountain, and all those questions that I was asking 20 years ago have all been answered. I have no more questions, except one. Who is going to test scientifically SRT? Because it can be tested. And I'd like to point you in the direction of how I think it can be done. Collect the baseline data, presenting symptoms. Use a remote telepathic intervention, because then we're bypassing all sorts of things. Let's look at what we're bypassing later. Is there a difference? The ideal conditions for testing the hypothesis include hearing voices. Where's the hearing voices man? Robert, where are you? Robert?
I'm not hearing voices, man, but
Hearing voices. Neurological conditions such as Robert's got an interest in people who hear voices. Neurological conditions such as Tourette's and epilepsy. Serious stuff. The remote method advantages: no direct contact with the subjects, it's non-intrusive, there's no influence of the placebo or the suggestion. And this is where my research into the work of Frederick Myers has its true value. Because he said, I'm not interested in what people believe, I'm not interested in what religions teach, and I'm not interested in the subtle influences of the power of suggestion. Let's get beyond all that. Go through the back door, get past the resistance, get past the beliefs, and test the reality. Bypass the conscious resistance and avoidance. Bypass entity resistance and avoidance. The smoke screen. Get round past the smoke screen. So it all can be done, but what stands in the way is institutional resistance. Now, rather than try to access a file that's going to give me a circle going around, we'll read it to you. Gary Schwartz. Anyone heard the name Gary Schwartz? No. Professor of psychology, Professor of medicine, neurology and psychiatry at the University of Arizona. Conducted a series of experiments over a period of 3 years with mediums to test the life after death hypothesis. His experiments were designed to eradicate any possibility of fraud or deception, and he designed protocols that would withstand any rigorous criticism of his methodologies. Inspired in part by the experiments with VNR Piper conducted by William James and others at the Society of Psychical Research, Myers was involved, as was Pierre Janet Stool. Serious research that was conducted 125 years ago. So he was inspired by that research. And Schwartz quoted William James, who said, in order to disprove that all crows are black, all it needs is for us to find one white one. So you can't dismiss anything without testing the hypothesis. Following the research and its conclusive findings, Schwartz acknowledges that his scientific training was a significant contributor to his skepticism. And in spite of the evidence before him, he acknowledges that he persisted in expressing an irrational opinion. And he writes, "The truth is that I was being scientifically hypocritical. I'd failed to do the very thing I always try to encourage my students and my colleagues to do. I realised that concerning belief in survival of consciousness, I was at the opinions level. Scientific theory strongly indicated the plausibility of the hypothesis, and the data were clear enough to enable me to hold the opinion that survival was true. I had witnessed with my own eyes. My degree of doubt in the presence of the data was frankly irrational, and I was experiencing skeptomania. My growing fear was that if I actually summarised and integrated the entire set of observations, I might be forced to conclude, at least concerning this specific research, that the skeptics were wrong." So this is institutionalised skepticism. So this is our enemy. I've been indicated by David, I've got to hurry up and move on. Jung. Where a lot of skeptics say that the evidence presented is the subject of fraud, Jung acknowledged that that was an absurd idea. So where are we now? Moving along very quickly. There's an awful lot of academic interest in spirit possession, especially from the anthropologists. And there's a lot of interest in investigations into what's become known as psi phenomena. And what's happening at the University of Bristol, at the Afterlife Research Centre, is anthropology and psi investigation being brought together as an academic investigation, being called paranthropology. And the rising star of that paranthropology, Jack Hunter, I was hoping he was going to be here today, it's a shame he's not, so I'd like to introduce him. But his boss, Dr. Fiona Bowie, is here, and I'm glad to see that we have a leading academic researcher in our presence. Head of the Afterlife Research Centre. They're doing a lot of very, very important work on ethnographic studies into the afterlife and the theoretical constructs of spirit entities. Kent University hold a series of conferences organised by the mystics. I'm fortunate, I took my master's degree at Kent University in the study of mysticism and religious experience, so I have a working relationship with Kent University department. And presented a paper at a conference a couple of years ago, Diamond, Imagination and Uncanny Intelligence. The book is coming out soon, and I have a chapter in that about Maya's work. So, on the academic front, I'm being able to make inroads. Fiona Bowie's department at Bristol are producing a book this year, Ethnographic Approaches to Mediumship, Trance, Possession in the World of Spirits. And I'm happy to say that I have a chapter in that book, based on the work of Maya's spirit possession and telepathic hypnosis. But for cutting edge research into this area, we have to go to Brazil. Edited by Spiritism and Mental Health. These guys are years ahead of us. Spiritist methods of treating the mental ill have been introduced into institutionalized medicine in Brazil since the 1930s. Exploring the Frontiers of the Mind-Brain Relationship, Professor Alexander Moreira Almeida, who I have come to know very, very well. Whenever there's a spiritualist conference going on in the UK, it always comes across Lewis's talks, and highly influential and enlightened man. And I use the term cutting edge of research with good reason. These guys are really pioneers in using scientific method to investigate these phenomena. I'm just finishing now. So this is where we are. This is where we are. Is future clinical research in the UK going to be conducted by the medics, by the psychiatrists, by the psychologists, this is my guess. King's College London, Institute of Psychiatry. They don't know it yet, but they will. Because they have the resources, the infrastructure, the ability to do this kind of research. All they need is the incentive. I invited one of their lecturers here today, but unfortunately he couldn't attend because he had family duties to attend. And I think it was just an excuse. But we will persist with the Institute. In the meantime, you are invited to collect your own routine data. To every patient who's a contributor to research, read the thesis and comment on it. I'd like you to read it and pass your comment. Join the Afterlife Research Centre and work with the anthropologists and contribute articles to the journals. Paranthropology, published by the Afterlife Research Centre. There's a new one that's just been launched, the Journal of Exceptional Experiences in Psychology. And here's their website. You can access all this information from my website. It's all there. Right? This is just started up, they've just launched. And if you have something to say, if you've got a case history or a theoretical construct or a methodology, send it to them. Let's get to it. And that, my friends, concludes where I wanted to stay.
Thank you very much, Terry, for sharing, well, not only your personal journey, what an extraordinary one it is, where it started, or things you discovered all on the way, but also highlighting the real importance of the bridge between the more mystical approaches and the scientific, and really recognizing that they're all under that one umbrella word, which means knowledge, doesn't it? And this is what we're all trying to seek and understand. So your contribution and push in this direction is wonderful, Terry. And I think we've just got to keep holding the vision that we can see eventually all of these sea changes taking place in what's orthodoxy.
Thanks for viewing. Other talks from the conference are also available on YouTube.